for the political parties with a schedule put up by the Electoral Commission of Zambia to speak to the electorates, and in this case it appears the UPND has managed to convince the people that they ought to continue with what they started. And among other things that the UPND could boast of, Darius, is the free education policy. We know that it has been signed into law, but we are speaking of a lot of children that have gotten back into school. A number of criticism has come with regards to that particular policy, but President Hakainde Hichilema has maintained that what is best is to allow children to be in school. And look at now the infrastructure, look at how they're going to recruit more teachers, and all those other things fall into place even as they move forward. Darius, another thing is the Constituency Development Fund that we have seen increase from time to time. And he promised during his campaign message that during his tenure in the second term of his leading of this country, will be able to increase the Constituency Development Fund. Of course, the debt restructuring is one of the issues that they speak to, and the economic recovery. But even as we speak to these factors that the UPND boast of, we know that when it comes to trickling down, the common Zambian or the ordinary Zambians have been talking of how the cost of living still remains high.
I think it's been very difficult, topic for the incumbent president Hakainde Hichilema. I think he was going into this election amid, concerns on how it's been very difficult to lower the cost of living, which him actually agree that the cost of living still remains very high. And I think his opponents were going in this election, especially during campaigns, talking about how, people have continued to buy commodities at a higher, price. And the promise has been that he is, going to work around, that if he is going to be re-elected as, a president for the second time, which could be his last term in office. And we are saying so because our Zambian constitution does not, allow a president to contest, for more than twice. And this was clarified even before the Constitutional Court, Victoria. Remember, there was, a challenge against, his predecessor, that's, former President Edgar Lungu. There was a challenge on whether or not he had held office twice, and the Constitutional Court did interpret in that, regard. Unless if the country's constitution is changed, that's when we can see him, if he, he wins this election, if he can go for, a third term in office. But for now, the constitution, bars him. So we are looking at, having by, his biggest, rival, and that's Mr. Brand, Munduvile. I think he did, the most when it comes to campaigns in some constituencies. And we're saying so because he is contesting, or he was contesting, this election, Victoria, for the first time after, being a member of parliament, Victoria. And if you see how he has been getting the votes in some constituencies, he's been able to surpass, the ruling party with a margin in some, areas. And critics are saying that he has, done so well, and if you look at also his party, the NRPUP, it's a party that people got to know of just during the time that the Electoral Commission of Zambia had set dates for nomination. Victoria, I know we were giving updates pertaining to that during the nomination, and many people were wondering which vehicle they were going to use to contest this election.
Indeed, he has really fought a good fight. I think a few months ago we wouldn't be having this discussion because there was literally no opposition. I think that was the description of how the political status was.
It was actually coming from the ruling party that they didn't have competition.
Exactly.
And shockingly,
here we are, where we have President Brand Munduvile competing against President Hakainde Hichilema, who is leading in this particular election. And of course, I think in a democracy, Darius, many have described this election as and how it should be, because you need to allow competition to thrive. You need to allow democracy to thrive by allowing other people to participate in an election such as this one. And I think Brian Mundubile and his political members have done so well. We can only wish them all the best. I know it is not yet the end of the road. The ECZ have not yet been able to declare who the winner is, but from the analysis that we have over the constituencies that have so far been announced and those that are remaining, we know that President Hakainde Hichilema has already gotten the 50+1. That is the threshold needed for the president to be declared as we
country. That is, Zambia's population. Social media, Victoria, I think, is one aspect of the campaigns that we have seen how, all the candidates that were contesting this election utilized social media to interact with, their people. And we saw how statements were, flying around social media. I think it has, become also concerns of misinformation and disinformation. Not something strange, if you had to ask me. I think during an election, the country, will get that. I think that's the reason why the Electoral Commission of Zambia were encouraging people to look out for verified announcements, verified results, Victoria, because they're the only ones who are mandated to conduct the election. We're bringing up this, Victoria, because we saw some of, the candidates declaring themselves as winners at parliamentary level, even at, a councillor level, but things, got to change. I know the candidates from the ruling, party who, thought that they were going to win an election as an MP, but that did not, happen. Instead, I think the person who got that seat should be from the opposition NRP UP. Yeah.
Indeed, Darius, and I think the road to this particular moment where we are today hasn't been all that. After the suspension, I think a number of stakeholders had raised concerns to say they don't know what could have transpired within that shortest period of time, because the agents were told to go home, to vacate, and all the representatives from political parties were told to go away, and that in itself they feel is a concern that should be addressed. But remember, the reason why that suspension happened was because of violent activities and actually theft in some cases. So we're talking about ballot papers that were actually stolen, and many stakeholders have raised concerns of how those ballot papers were going to be reconciled and accounted for. We are here because even just a few hours ago, Daria at the results center, something they feel is new, but I'm told even in 2021 was the case at the results center. But they also question the issues surrounding the Gen 20 forms, disputed results, and the alleged targeting of opposition actors. Really something they have called on to various stakeholders that this really needs urgent attention. They feel that the party has had these concerns, of which they feel should not be dismissed, but treated as isolated, and calls for the Electoral Commission of Zambia, the security institutions, observers, civil society, the church, and the international community to ensure that at every stage of the electoral process is conducted transparently and in accordance with the law. These are some of the reasons I think that we've been able to hear. And speaking of NRPUP, we know that I think from their members, none of them is here. I don't know if you have been able to spot anyone. In the afternoon, we had an incident of bruise. I think the law also provides for petitions, and this is why we're saying this is not the end of the road. In as much as we are going to have a declaration of the winner tonight, each political party or presidential candidate that does not accept these results, they have an opportunity to seek audience in the higher courts.
In the higher courts, indeed. I think for presidential petitions, it should be, within 14 days, and that should also be done before the inauguration. If, Mr. Brian Mundubile feels that the petition, the elections were not, fair, credible, and transparent. Like you have said, he still, has an opportunity to go to court and challenge the decision of the Electoral Commission of Zambia, ECZ, to declare, his biggest opponent politically, who is, President Hakainde Hichilema, and then the Constitutional Court can be able to make a decision. That's, the final court of jurisdiction. It's I think it should be 2015, 2016, if my memory serves me, right. We had this, very President Hakainde Hichilema challenging, the election of then incumbent President Edgar Lungu. He cited quite a number of, issues that he needed the court to look at and to declare the then, election now, and void. And the Constitutional Court, throughout that particular petition on illegalities, that the time in which it was supposed, to be heard had elapsed. The famous 14 days means 14 days, and still after, the dismissal of that particular petition, there's still, a lot of, talk from the then opposition that the United Party for National Development, they were still not, satisfied with the decision of the Constitutional Court, then. And if this happened, Victoria, like I said, then we'll be seeing another, presidential petition. We need to talk about these things because these things, can happen, and the law actually demands that it is the period for petitioning. It's not just the presidential petition that can be heard. We know of even at Parliament, the candidates that have lost at the election, if they feel that the decision of the Electoral Commission of Zambia to declare a parliamentary candidate as, a duly elected member, winning and reversing the decision of the Electoral Commission of Zambia. So we still have, time to talk about these particular elections. It's not yet over, even when the Electoral Commission of Zambia, ECZ, today announces, aside from the petitions, Victoria, there is also another big event. Whoever is going to carry the day, inauguration, something that we will also, talk. Even the period that, this particular person is going, to rule, there are things that they have promised, and these are the things that we, the media, on behalf of the millions of, people, will be able to talk about, because we're talking about accountability here. How will this person, be able to fulfill the promises that they have made now that, they are elected? Even during the campaigns, I think whoever is going, to contest the election, then after 5 years, they will be looking at some of, these things. Victoria, as we wait for the Electoral Commission of Zambia, ECZ, to announce the first batch, we know that in some constituencies, the status, as I think an hour ago, 2 or 3 hours ago, some of the results were not yet announced. We don't know if in Mandevu the results have been announced. Even in